available on the website as well as a recording of the presentation. So you see on the screen, this is our team for today. I'm Gordon Bauer, Director of Grants Management for Mobile County. We're joined by Renee Barron, who's our Deputy Director of Grants Management. The county has hired a consultant, Haggerty, and we're joined by their team members, Laura Munifo and Ashley Napier, as well as members from the state's consultant, Horn. Next slide. So this is an agenda overview of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through an overview of CDBG DR in general, our vision for the community, unmet needs assessment discussion, local recovery plan discussion, next steps, and then a discussion and question section at the end. This is a snapshot of where we are now. So as I said, we've had 4 public engagement meetings prior to that, and this is the 5th one. We will also have 2 more public hearings and a public comment period following this once the plan has been in a more final form. Next slide. So now we'll go through an overview of CDBG DR. So DR funding is what we call a supporting piece in the recovery from a storm like this. So there's a process for how federal funding is applied to the recovery. It goes first with insurance, then non-HUD federal funding like SBA, FEMA, then DR funds come in, and finally state, local, and other funding. So each funding is supposed to cover separate elements so you don't have duplication of benefit, and you have to coordinate those funding sources to maximize the recovery from a storm. Next slide. This is an overview of the allocation that Mobile County is set to receive from ADECA. So it's in total $28,379,808. That's broken down into 3 separate smaller allocations, a little over $12 million for housing activities, over $15 million for non-housing activities, and a separate $1 million allocation for the local recovery planning program. And so for any use of this funding, the activity has to be eligible for DR funding, meet a CDBG national objective, have a tieback to the storm or disaster, and meet a unmet recovery need. Next slide. This is an overview of how the funding processes from the federal level to the local level. Begins with HUD, then the state, then the county, and finally local program recipients. So kind of as a disclaimer, the county's funds cannot be used for the repair of single-family homes damaged by the storm. The state, ADECA, ran a program called the Home Recovery Alabama program. It was funded with a little over $280 million for that repair of single-family homes. They are not currently taking applications, but if you need more information about that program, you can call them at that number in the bottom right corner of the slide. Next slide, please. So the county's housing allocation can be used for a few things. So it can be affordable housing activities consist of new construction, rehabilitation, demolition, and the types of properties it normally works on are single-family, multifamily, apartment complexes, and townhomes. And HUD defines affordable housing as housing where the occupant is not paying more than 30% of their gross income for housing costs, including utilities. Next slide, please. The non-housing allocation can be used for one of these 4 things: infrastructure, which is repair, replacement, or relocation of damaged public facilities, economic revitalization, planning, and mitigation. So this is our first interactive portion of the presentation. We'd like to get feedback from you all for these questions, kind of your vision of the community currently and in the future, and we'll try and visualize what that looks like. And you can use your microphone, you can use chat, whatever works best for you. So the first one is, how would you describe Mobile County in a few words?
In regards to like the lack of affordable housing, that kind of umbrella, or?
It could be affordable housing, could be in regards to the disaster recovery, the storms, could just be what you think is most important about Mobile.
Okay, and not necessarily related to Penelope House or through the Penelope House lens?
Either one.
Because, with us, in any kind of hurricane or whatever, we have generators and what have you, and we never evacuate any of our clients unless there's a the governor orders mandatory evacuation. Because our clients can't go to public shelters for the safety issues. Mobille's a small, big town, y'all know. So you can't go anywhere without somebody with a cell phone who could alert an abuser where you are. So we have all the measures to self shelter in any storm. So we are a member of VOAD, Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster, but we don't necessarily participate with our clients in any of the things that happen in the community at large. But where we find problems is while we can continue to shelter them here, there's always concerns that they're safe, but their parents aren't safe, or their siblings aren't safe, or something like that. So we run into problems with people who want to leave shelter and ignore their safety issues because of concerns for family. So if a parent who is at home on oxygen needs to go to a shelter, and they don't feel there's enough special needs shelters or something like that, then they'll leave our shelter and put their safety at risk to make sure that their parents taken care of. So one of the things we're always looking at too when there's a disaster is what kind of resources are in the community for those kind of shelters, and special needs shelters is a really important one, because that's to us, because that's why somebody would leave our shelter where they feel their needs are met, but they're concerned about their family and the community. So that's a big one to us.
Great. So I think we're hearing having access, communication, access to family. I think overarching, we wanted to get a sense from those that participate today on how they describe Mobile County, that's in a general sense. Just working with Mobile, just the constant graciousness of the community, and I think ultimately getting a few words that describe Mobile County outside of the context of the recovery world. We wanted to really hone in on what the strengths of the community are, and see if we can tie any of the potential recovery projects to what the strengths are of your community, and to further strengthen and further bring the community back from a disaster. So out of your experience in Mobile and living and working, how would you describe Mobile County in a few words, in just a very general context?
I would say Mobile County has a lot of trying to think of the word outside of angels in our community.
Sure.
I think we don't, as Mobilians, we don't necessarily rely on the government to come in and save us.
Mm-hmm.
Neighbors are more likely to help neighbors. And that's where I think we have retained some of our small town characteristics or
sure.
values, more values that I think even though the city continues to grow, I still think there's a good bit of neighbor helping neighbor helping neighbors sense. So that's something that I would think is certainly, to me, what's very important in Mobile is people are often stepping up to meet needs of others without necessarily waiting on a program from the county or a program from the feds to come in and save them.
Sure. And are there any parts of the community, so your community is resilient locally, you're a resilient community, you're neighborly, you work with the small town values are still very prominent in everyday life. That's what I'm hearing and trying to capture. And so based on all of that, and is there a vision that you see for your community, whether it be that it's more these are examples, more environmentally friendly, more, focusing in on green infrastructure, or green meaning like when we rebuild, focus in on, making sure that there are areas that maybe you see that we can expand on for the vision for the community.
I think accessibility
Got it.
is the best vision of all. Is making sure it's accessible, whether it's someone who has a car who doesn't have a car, someone who has a
Mhm.
job who doesn't have it, those kind of things. I think
Mhm.
that's probably one of the most important things right now is accessibility.
Great. And you mentioned the downtown really building up. Is that a fair, downtown expansion? Is that a fair assessment for Mobile?
You know, from someone who grew up in Midtown,
Mhm.
who lives what is it's not West Mobile anymore, because the way Mobile has grown so much. I think downtown will always be um, a great thing to have, but not everybody utilizes.
Sure. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that people, is it lack of maybe small businesses? Is it, out of just curiosity,
Lazy.
what lazy? That's fair. That's
I
fair.
mean,
It's enticing. Yeah,
it's hard if you live at West Mobile and you want to go downtown. It's a major trip,
track.
and it's
Yeah,
not necessarily because Airport Boulevard is so much traffic and everything else. You literally just have to sit in your car that long to get there. So it's just distance,
distance.
more
Okay.
so than anything else, because so much is built up in West Mobile that um, you don't have to go downtown anymore. So there has to be
Mm,
a draw. There has to be something going on that pulls you down there. Otherwise, there's a lot of nice restaurants and other places. There's a lot of places for family entertainment that you can do without having to go downtown. The water is the
gotcha.
big draw, but I don't. I think me personally, we've never utilized the water well enough to enjoy it, like a
Got
river
it.
walk or something like that.
Got it. Okay. Was there anyone else on the line that had any other suggestions, or, Gordon, Renee, feel free. You're the part of the community as well. Well,
But
Tony, and that was very helpful.
well, I was just gonna say too, the other thing is, as much as Mobile tries to pull things in, look at sports, um, it just drives you crazy how people don't necessarily support when we do have things.
Mm,
So, and that pulse is hard to read. I mean, who would have thought we didn't support baseball? It's a baseball town at one, so I mean,
sure.
we tried everything. I definitely give the city and the county kudos for trying anything and everything, but it's hard to um, get people to support things long term.
Mm. Yeah, it is tough. Okay. Gordon, I think it should show up both.
All right. We'll see what our word map looks like.
It might be hard to see, so I apologize with the background, but we have accessibility, we have affordable, we have small town values, we have walkable, neighborly, shelters, safe shelters, communication, housing, community engagement, um, uh, downtown, strengthening the downtown area. So those are the takeaways from the
But I
cloud.
think when you emphasize downtown so much,
Mm-hmm.
then your West Mobile people are kind of like, okay, here they go again. I don't think there's
Gotcha.
ever, has there ever been a major project outside of downtown other than sadly Hank Aaron Stadium or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't consider the fairgrounds, city or county. I mean, that's just a separate thing in its own.
Yeah, so maybe it's trying to entice people to get to downtown, but also balancing what's happening on West Mobile as well.
Right.
So,
Right.
okay, okay, that
All
was
right.
really great. Thank you so much, Tony.
Mhm.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. And so now we'll pass it over to Renee for the next portion of the presentation.
So now we'll discuss the unmet needs assessment. Next slide. So the unmet needs assessment must be completed before deciding how to allocate the CDBG-DR funding. We identify and prioritize critical unmet needs for long-term recovery. We consider the work that's already accomplished, the community goals, as well as the county's capacity to plan for, manage, and implement a coordinated long-term recovery process. Each municipality, tribe, as well as organizations' data was critical to obtain the most accurate assessment. And all of this information will be used to develop the local recovery plan. We do have a note that all potential projects and partners will be guided by the activities that are deemed eligible, as well as the unmet needs. Next slide, please. So the graphic listed below reviews and details our unmet needs assessment process flow. So step one, we developed the assessment tool and the data sets. So research methods and data collection techniques were used to help gather and analyze the data. So some of these included surveys, questionnaires, interviews, focus groups, as well as mapping tools. When we looked into data collection, the county conducted multiple public engagement meetings, this one being engagement meeting number 5, along with one-on-one municipal, tribal, and special district meetings. So the data collected at each of these meetings includes the affected population, impacted areas, impacted physical and social needs, existing community resources, and the identification of gaps and areas of unmet needs throughout the community. When we looked at phase 3, analyzed data, the county reviewed and collected data against the data provided in the state action plan and the unmet needs assessment. We also identified common themes of unmet need throughout the county and considered demographics, geographics, and socioeconomic factors. Step 4, determining strategies. The county looked at creative and sustainable solutions that would address the identified unmet needs. So we looked at infrastructure improvement, resilient housing solutions, hardening of a critical facility, and economic revitalization to aid the economic security of the community. When we looked to prioritize the needs, it was based on the severity, impact, specifically on low to moderate income individuals within the community and the feasibility by which we could address them. Step 6, report and communicate findings. The county presented the key needs via an updated and localized unmet needs assessment. This assessment also highlights specific vulnerabilities or disparities within the affected populations and impacted areas. Next slide, please. When assessing the data for the Housing Unmet Needs Summary, the Mobile County Commission reviewed data related to the following: housing affordability and the cost burden to residents within the county, FEMA individual assistance. It was collected from FEMA on individuals who applied for individual assistance following both disasters. Insurance related to claims filed by individuals and households to their private insurance carriers. SBA loans, small business loans offered by banks and online lenders. Next slide, please. So when we look at the affordable housing unmet needs, we have a couple of questions that we would request your feedback on. What are the key housing challenges that need to be addressed?
So again, is this related to the hurricanes or in general?
Both. They can be both because there could be an impact as a result of the hurricanes that we didn't see pre-storm that we're now experiencing post-storm.
Right. So looking from where I am at Penelope House, the key how, you know, we shelter people longer than they need to be in shelter just because they have nowhere to go. They can't afford what is required of them to move into an apartment, even if they have a job, if what they're getting paid isn't the income that's required. You know, so affordable housing is huge. And that affordable housing, that would be in an area, because if you don't have a vehicle, it's very difficult. So, you know, how many people can you put, you know, on Azalea Road so they can walk to work or they can walk to the bus stop? I mean, there's just not a lot of places that A are affordable and B on a transportation line. So that's always my biggest need that I see, just because we see it so often leaving the shelter. Housing challenges I see because I grew up in Midtown and my mom still lives there. You see houses that are in need of repair, and if they could be repaired before storms come, they might fare the storm better. So it's almost like preventive work to moderate to low income people who have a home, but it may not be in the best shape, and they're more likely to you know, probably have severe damage from a storm just because they're not built to where they should be.
Any additional feedback? And we appreciate your feedback, Tony.
Hi, yes, this is Maggie Rivers. I'm with the Moab Band of Choctaw Indians, and I'm representing Lily Steiner, who is the Executive Director of the Moab Choctaw Housing Authority. She was unable to be with us this afternoon, but I'd just like to emphasize, of course, our need for housing as well. We just recently received a grant to have 24 new homes built here on the reservation. However, we have a waiting list of over 300 people who are in need of homes. So that is definitely one of the challenges that we have. 24 homes will help some families, but of course it won't address the overarching need of housing in our community.
Thank you for your comments. So what specific needs have been identified? And I know we talked in general, specifically for low to moderate income areas affected by the disaster. So I've heard accessibility to transportation, as well as access to repair, as well as looking at the availability. Were there any other items that came to mind that we can add to the list?
Yes, this is Maggie again. I think for our communities, one of the things that we have assessed is the need to, I believe mitigation, if correct me if I'm wrong about mitigation, but it includes providing more stability and strength to the homes, and that's some of our homes here in the area are substandard homes, including those homes that are not located on the reservation. And I think we would be very interested in knowing more about the mitigation part of it and how we could get some of our families involved in getting more stability to the homes that they already are residing in.
And are you aware of any housing assistance program? And if yes, are there helpful and are there any barriers that have been identified?
I mean, there's several housing assistance programs, but they all have waiting lists. So like I said, if someone's in shelter and we refer them to Housing First, they can do the intake, they can do everything, they can get on a list. But we have never had anyone leave shelter and go immediately into housing through Housing First, unless they have a like a rapid rehousing grant or something like that. But even those, the waiting list is so long. Like I said, they don't get immediate assistance. The housing, the most clients that we have go to transitional living, even through our own program or either through like Sybil Smith, Dumas Wesley, Sybil Smith, because we had a client this week who rented a room out of a home. I mean, we literally have not had anyone probably in the last 3 months leave us and go immediately to an apartment. And we have some that have good jobs. They're not necessarily working poor, but they just don't qualify or their waiting list. Senior housing, we've had victims in shelter who are 60 up, and in all the HEPA apartment complexes and the other senior, where it's sliding scale for rent, they're all full. And like I said, they're all waiting lists. So I think, there's some housing assistance programs there, but there's just so much of a need. It's not immediate assistance at all.
Any other programs or barriers? And so what long-term housing needs do you anticipate for the community?
Well, I personally love the idea of transitional living best, because if you have someone in a setting for 2 years, it really gives them a lot of time to clean up their credit, get a good job, not working poor, save, do the things they need to do. And when they launch from a 2-year program, they're more likely to be able to be first-time home ownership or something like that. It's just it's just it's just tough to leave a shelter, emergency setting and launch on your own independently.
And how can we ensure that prioritization aligns with both the immediate needs and the long-term recovery goals?
Are you a magician?
No,
I think there has to be a blended approach. I mean, and like I said, when you're dealing with grants, your hands are tied a lot of times, and you may have great ideas and great thoughts on how to get there, but you live and die by the grant.
And does anyone have any additional suggestions for improving affordable housing recovery efforts that weren't mentioned? Well, thank you all for your feedback. Next slide, please. So when we look at the infrastructure unmet needs summary, per the subrecipient agreement with the DECA, $15,244,376 of the total awarded allocation must be spent on non-housing activities. So the section before us reflects the county's non-federal cost share and non-match projects unmet need. The table represents the estimated total unmet need broken out by each infrastructure program. We have the FEMA Public Assistance, FEMA Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and the non-match standalone. As the county has met with critical stakeholders, the need for FEMA PA non-federal cost share due to the impacts of both storms has been brought further to the forefront. The FEMA PA table breaks down the FEMA PA sites and costs distributed by PA category within the county. So for the FEMA PA projects under Hurricanes Sally and Zeta, the federal cost share is 90% of the total project cost, which leaves 10% for the non-federal local cost share, resulting in an estimated $297,993.17. In addition to the PA unmet need noted above, the county has identified a significant burden on local governments for the HMGP non-federal cost share. The federal share of assistance is 75% of the eligible project cost, requiring the local government to contribute the remaining 25% in cost share. The HMGP table outlines the 4 projects with the non-federal cost share unmet need estimated at $1,240,800. To identify non-FEMA match projects, the county conducted outreach and met with municipalities, tribes, and special districts throughout the county to gather input. The county requested that each jurisdiction submit project-related unmet needs, and based on this total review, the identified unmet need is $93,994,668. So our total estimated infrastructure unmet need is $95,533,461. Next slide, please. So when we think in terms of the infrastructure unmet need, what infrastructure areas or issues do you think should be prioritized for recovery?
I'm looking at the other questions too to see where I'm going. You know, if I'm looking at infrastructure, just being growing up in Mobile, you look at all the polluted water. You hear it over and over and over again. And it's just disgusting when you think about sewage going into the water supply and those kind of things. So I think that's been a long time problem that if somehow these funds could help go towards some of that, I think the whole community would certainly rally behind that.
Are there any other infrastructure areas or issues? So what criteria should we use to prioritize projects funded by the DR grant?
That's always difficult. I mean, usually you put, in my mind, you put helping people first. Although you understand the importance of the other infrastructure as well. So I'm back to trying to have a balance of making sure that you don't water it out so thin that you're not doing the job that needs to be done, but at least having, you know, one people first project and one infrastructure project.
I agree with the People First project. I think, especially for our communities, looking at the low income, the disabled, those who are really unable to provide any of this that's necessary for themselves.
So how can we balance what we see as short-term immediate needs versus long-term needs in our process?
I always kind of go back to, you know, what is the grant going to allow you to do? So even if, you know, having affordable housing is the most important thing to me, if they're not going to give funds to make houses, then, you know, what's the other angle? Do you make sure that all your shelters are in place and taken care of, so there's somewhere for them to go for the next disaster? Then I would say you look at every shelter we have in Mobile, and if they need new roofs or whatever, you make sure they're fortified as the best they can, so at least everyone has somewhere to go. If you can't do, quote, affordable housing or something like that. I mean, even like us, I mean, the shelter was built in 1990 and it needs a new roof, but it just hasn't been. If we're considered a shelter, you know, that would be awesome if the funds were given to us to put a new roof on, and therefore we will be a better place to, you know, stay here unless the governor mandates a you know, evacuation.
And I
And-
think having a shelter for our area is very important. We do not have a shelter. As you may know, we actually have 2 reservations, one located here on Mount Vernon and one located in McIntosh as well. And neither one of those sites have a shelter. And for some of our elderly and disabled, which mostly is the population that we serve, it's very difficult for them to leave, when there's a hurricane or something like that coming. So having a shelter for these people to come to would be very necessary for us. That would certainly be a priority for us.
Are there any other suggestions that were not mentioned or that folks would like added to the list? We appreciate the feedback. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk in more detail about our local recovery plan. So the LRP, or Local Recovery Plan, is a formal document that serves as a guide for the community's disaster recovery needs. So you guys talked about housing, infrastructure, as well as economic revitalization. So the drafted plan uses these 3 areas and reviews collected data during the unmet needs assessment to develop the comprehensive plan. And it expands upon the community needs, provides a framework for awarding projects, and includes budgets per program and project, and sets the groundwork for implementation. It also sets a timeline to spend all DR funding prior to May 18th, 2028. Next slide, please. So when we look at the connection to unmet needs, the county worked closely with local municipalities and tribal governments to develop the proposed projects and programs to address the assessed unmet needs. We looked at the mid-recovery zones, which ADECA defines as designated areas within a mid-county. The zones focus on areas identified in the unmet needs assessment that were substantially impacted by hurricanes Sally and Zeta. And the way that it's all connected, after reviewing the data from the unmet needs assessment to assist in defining the mid-recovery zones, the county commission used this information to help focus on projects and programs that would make the greatest impact on the targeted area. Next slide, please. So when we looked at the proposed affordable housing programs, these are some of the projects and programs that we are proposing based on the data received. So the first is the home ownership down payment assistance program. It will primarily be used to address the needs of residents who lost their homes during the 2020 disasters by addressing funding gaps and burdens such as down payments and closing costs. We'll coordinate with units of local government and nonprofits, looking specifically at housing counseling, training and homebuyer education, homebuyer program delivery, and financial management. Again, this program is intended primarily to assist the LMI population. Next slide, please. We're also looking at a voluntary homebuyer buyout program, and it will acquire property from LMI households in high-risk flood areas to reduce flood risk during future disasters while eliminating repetitive losses. Buyout properties will be in a targeted location, including those in low-lying areas as well as flood-prone locations. Once the properties are purchased, the structures will be demolished. The land will become deed restricted and can only be used for the following: natural green space, recreation, and stormwater management. Next slide, please. We're also looking at the development of affordable housing program, which will support the construction of new affordable rental housing units for very low and low income households. So the goal of this program is to expand the current supply of safe, sanitary, and affordable housing units across Mobile County, support LMI community's need for additional affordable housing units, and encourage public, private, and nonprofit partnerships to address affordable housing needs. The program will provide a gap financing to projects located within Mobile County supporting the LMI community, and all property owners must agree to rent restrictions for at least 20 years. Next slide, please. We also have the Public Housing Authority Improvements Project, which seeks to repair, renovate, and strengthen the infrastructure of the Mobile County Housing Authority, the Housing Authority of the City of Chickasaw, and the Housing Authority of the City of Pritchard. When we conducted the unmet needs assessment, the county found the following gaps for each of these housing authorities. So Pritchard, $505,500, Mobile County, $244,168, and Chickasaw, $2,500,000, totaling $3,249,668 in remaining unmet needs. So the
Wow.
improvements, yes.
From Pritchard's 241, the housing, Chickasaw's 288, and look at that huge difference. And it's what, 47 more, but it's, 2 million more.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm just.
No, you're fine. And again, the improvements are targeted toward public housing units primarily occupied by LMI households. Gordon will now review the remaining slides.
I think we have the discussion questions first.
Oh, sorry. So when we look at the affordable housing program, a couple of questions. Do you know if residents in the community struggling to find affordable housing?
Yeah, that's definitely a yes.
Yes.
What is the condition of the community's affordable rental housing?
Dismal.
I agree.
Okay. And were there a lot of properties that sustained flood damage following hurricanes Sally and Zeta?
I don't know. That would be a
Yes.
question for y'all. Like I said, this is 4 years ago too. So, even if they had sustained damage, are they fixed by now? Or are they just rigged to hold them over until this came through?
Well, I can speak on behalf of Pritchard Housing Authority. We still have some areas with flood damage that we still dealing with. When the hard rain come, we just had a month full of rain for the month of July. And when it's coming up in the tenants' homes, they can't get down the street, can't get in their driveway. It's pretty rough.
And do you feel as though the proposed affordable housing programs will help to address community needs?
Well, I think fixing all of those, that had damage certainly will help, but that's not helping the next group. That's a one step that needs to be done, but obviously providing more is needed as well.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a help initially, but right now they're still suffering from those issues. So it will help. It's a step.
And are there any other projects that you feel will assist in addition to what we've outlined?
I have a question, please. This is Maggie again from the Moore Housing Authority. Is it too late to do an assessment of our housing project and include that in the unmet needs?
You can definitely send that information over to us so that we can include it in the plan. That would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Renee. So now we're going to go through the proposed infrastructure program and projects. So the first up is the permanent generators for critical facilities programs. So that is aiming to install and upgrade generators in critical facilities throughout the community, ensuring continuous power supplies during disasters, enhancing resilience, and ensuring the safety and well-being of residents. That project would have 3 phases. First, the assessment and planning phase. Second, the procurement and installation of the generators. And third, training and ongoing maintenance for the facility staff who would be maintaining those generators. Next slide. Second is the Sweeney Lane Bridge Improvements Project. This project aims to strengthen critical infrastructure located on Sweeney's Lane in Pritchard, Alabama. This bridge is the primary point of ingress and egress between St. Stephen's Road and South Wilson Avenue for the surrounding neighborhood. Trying to enhance the integrity of the existing bridge, improving the resiliency of the structure, and it would have 2 phases. First, assessment and design, and second, construction and rehabilitation. Next slide. Third is the disaster shelter project, which would attempt to establish a safe and accessible shelter for county residents, expanding the existing program in service of its vulnerable populations. So it would be identifying, assessing, and building a new disaster shelter with 2 main phases. First is identifying potential locations and evaluating the feasibility of a facility like that. It has certain criteria for the location, such as being in a low risk, high elevation area. And then that would also include the design phase. And then second would be the actual construction of the disaster shelter. And it would have to meet American Red Cross hurricane evacuation shelter selection standards. Next slide. And then we have the First Responder HMGP Match Project. So this supports projects that reduce the risk of future disasters. The county will be providing the 10% match, which is required by FEMA for this HMGP, or hazard mitigation project, would be for the construction of a first responder shelter, which reduces the risk of service disruptions during disasters, enhances the community's overall disaster preparedness and response capabilities, and contributes to the long-term resilience and safety of the community. Next slide. So, in the event of a future disaster, do you feel that these infrastructure improvements will help the community be more resilient?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And after hearing the projects and programs proposed for infrastructure, will they address the community's concerns?
So when you're talking about the generators, is that like putting them in all the schools that open up as shelters?
So yes, so it would be any facility across the county that could serve either during the storm or after the storm for the recovery efforts. So distribution centers for supplies, cooling or heating centers, depending on the weather, response, staging grounds for hurricane response, anything like that. So we haven't identified all of the sites. This is still open.
So my only concern with that is if you put it in someone that has like a weak roof and you got a great generator, but the roof caves in, then what good did the generator do? So that's what I'm saying, when I was saying before, whoever's a shelter now, I would make sure that those shelters are fortified to the best they can be. And then certainly add the generators to make sure. But like I said, I know it's been a while, but like I said, I know a couple of the shelters had some problems like with leaking and things like that. So I would want to make sure, I would, suggest, to make sure that everywhere those generators go, that, they're sustainable shelters that, those generators can do their job.
Sure. Thank you for that feedback. Are there any other potential programs that you feel should be included? Programs or projects that are not?
Gordon,
Okay.
do we submit projects that we feel would be specific to our community to you? Or, because I know that we definitely are in need of shelters.
So at this point, we are not taking applications for general projects. We are still taking feedback if there's something that you think should be included, but isn't. But we don't anticipate doing a application process for the location of the shelter. It'll be a feasibility analysis countywide of where it should be.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next slide. Now we'll go through next steps. So after this, we plan to hold 2 public hearings and a official public comment period for the more final version of the plan, but the dates of those public hearings are still to be determined. We will post the dates and information for those public hearings on our website once it's available. This is an overview of the timeline of what's happened so far, where we are now. We are currently in the local recovery plan development stage. This will be followed by application for funding process, the implementation of projects and or programs, and then the closeout of projects or programs. And as Renee said, that is 2028 that we have to have the closeout completed by.
And we
Next
could have
slide.
2 more hurricanes before then.
Knock on wood, I hope not.
I hope not. So, but none of the funding in the earlier slide really goes to help individuals. It's more to help the structure, the infrastructure, those kind of things, right?
For the infrastructure side, yes. For the housing side, there is the buyout program and the homeownership assistance program. And then the development of affordable housing would benefit low to moderate income individuals in the end. But any kind of repair of homes damaged by the storm had to have been done through ADECA's program rather than ours.
Yeah, that would be my thought if there was ever any funding out there, like I said, to almost do like a habitat, rebuild with some of the houses that when the hurricane comes in, it'll just blow them down kind of thing. If there's any way to do that at a individual level, I think that would be awesome, because you can just drive through town and see some homes that you just know.
It's true. It's true. Did anybody have any other questions, concerns about the information? All right. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time and attention today. As I said, we'll still have a few more steps to go to finish the completion of the plan. We'll have those public hearings, and we would appreciate if you all would attend and continue to give us that feedback during the public comment period. All the information will be posted on the county website, including this presentation and the recording of the meeting. But that's it for today. So thank you. Have a good one.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Renee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, guys.